It's about stalkers, persons who go into the zones where the aliens were and recover these ejecta of an alien visit. This is similar to the recent the Southern Reach trilogy, which was filmed in the movie Annihilation. These ideas of the roadside picnic. The roadside picnic problem is effectively one of scale. The aliens, would they be so much bigger than us or so much more advanced in technology? We are to them like a squirrel is to a passing Buick as it has a roadside picnic. And this problem of scale is also a metaphorical spiritual problem. At what scale, at what level of resolve and context and focus do we place ourselves? It's a question of humility and arrogance, and what is the appropriate place for ourselves. So early in the parashah, we are informed and enjoined of the laws of remittances of debt and remittance of property in the Jubilee year. And we learn in Leviticus that the land cannot be sold beyond reclaim. The land is mine, not me, God. You are just strangers and sojourners on it. This tension of God referring to us as strangers and sojourners on the land, I think so many of us also experience as the ultimate issue of life. We are just for our, as the psalmist would say, 70 to 80, or God more if we're lucky, 120 years, just sojourners on this planet. And 70 to 80 years might seem like a modest amount of time if we count the age of the universe as just under 6 millennia. But if we understand it to be closer to 13 billion years, it seems like a trivia. That's the challenge. That's the spiritual challenge that I want to pose to you today. At what scale do we behave, act, and understand ourselves? So on this question of the strangers and the sojourners, I want to refer you to two very different commentators. Bache ibn Pekuda of Spain in the 11th century, who wrote Duties of the Heart, and Yaakov ben Wolfkrantz, the Dubnow Maggid of the 18th century, in Dubnow, which I think is now Poland, one of the early Hasidic generations. And they have what to say on the stranger and the sojourner. So Bache ibn Pekuda says this. I'm going to read you an extended quotation. One is necessarily in either one of two situations. Either she is a stranger or she is among family and relatives. If one is a stranger, let their companionship be with God during times of loneliness and trust in God during the period of being a stranger. And let him or her contemplate that the soul is also just a stranger in the world. All people are strangers here, as the verse says, you are strangers and residents. And let that one reflect in their heart that all those who have relatives here in a short time will be left a solitary stranger. Neither relative nor son will be able to help him, and none of them will be with him. It's morose, but also true. We've seen a couple of funerals this week. Shiva coming up, Shiva concluding, unveiling coming up. Death is the framework of life. And without it, our existence here would be pretty meaningless. We would be no more than atoms coalescing for an unlimited time in an unlimited form. On the other hand, someone offered me this experiment. There's a book called Soulcraft, which is about taking a retreat in nature, just as John Muir would do, fasting in ways that Native Americans may have looked. And I was asked, why don't we do this more? Why don't human beings take refuge in silence and nature? So I tried it. You want to know the answer why people don't do it more? I think Bill Murray would say this. We're afraid of what we might find. We're afraid that when we contemplate silence or absence, we're afraid that there is also, I think, for many of us, an absence inside. And this is a bit what the the Dubna Magid suggests, is the second source I want to refer you to. Just as Leviticus says, we are foreigners and residents here. I'm going to get some water. Ooh, big bottle. We're foreigners and residents here, you and I, says God. When you see yourself as foreigners, I will reside with you. But if you view yourself as a resident, then I am estranged. That kind of submission to power greater than ourselves, to the amazingness, to the awesomeness and variety and vastness of the universe is what makes us whole, paradoxically. The paradox of scale. But you can be trapped in it by something as simple as staring at a tree for too long. I've always been, I carry the name of a tree, one of my children does, and I've always been fond of the morality of trees. They do no harm and only good, as the giving tree teaches us. They bring the world oxygen, they don't do violence, they do harm? Oh. Okay. Sorry. But they're 99% good. It's a better ratio than most humans. But some trees are so much bigger than us and so much older than us and live placidly amid the noise that even just looking at a tree can be daunting, and comprehending the near infinity of the universe. That there are, as Terry Lee pointed out, more neurons in your head than stars in the universe, and just that awesome density and the awesome expanse outside of us can be... Scientists, you have your own conversation later. It's not... it's all, yeah. This is a rabbi's version of science. I took rocks for jocks in college. I try to understand as much science as I can. But that's the danger. You can fall also too far to the other end, which is to think you're trivia, to feel like nothing and that your life doesn't matter, and you might as well not even try to have kids. You might as well not even write that book. You might as well not even work, right? And the Hasidic masters were very aware of this. In addition to Reb Simcha Bunim of Peshishka, I think I've taught you this before, teaching us that we ought to keep two notes in our pocket, one a quote from Talmud and one a quote from Bible. I am but dust and ashes, and for my sake the world was created, to live in that tension of extreme significance and extreme insignificance. And if humility is not just thinking less of ourselves, but thinking of ourselves less, there is a danger to too much humility. The Hasidic masters say that sins derive from the sin of inherent insignificance. When a person ceases to be sensitive to the paramount importance that God attaches to one's life and deeds and says, I don't really matter, which is that Abraham statement of I'm just dust and ashes, that's not humility, that's in fact arrogance. It really means I could just do what I want. I'm not sure if I agree with that, but my uncle had a great statement. He said it's not false humility, it's misplaced humility. The danger is not false humility in people, but it's to be humble at the wrong moment. So back to the strange numerology of the Parsha. So this Parsha has the cycles of 7 years, the seven-year cycles to lead to the Jubilee year. This Parsha has the counting of the Omer. We had it last week as well. The 7 weeks of 7 days. I've explained to you why 7? Some of you I've showed this to. This is a theory I've heard which makes so much sense, I bet it's true. Why is 7 a big number for humans? And why is it if you ask someone to pick a number between 1 and 10, they almost always pick 7? After that, 3, you can usually guess someone's choice. You have 10 fingers. And the only number that has no shared factors and is also itself a prime is 7. Just to say you have some primes like 1, 2, and 3, but they factor into other numbers under 10. So we have all these scales and cycles, and the Tur HaAruch, I think, wrote in the 19th century, notes that the Omer, the cycle of the Omer, 7 weeks of 7 days, corresponds to the cycle of the Jubilee, which is 7 blocks of 7 years. That there's a choice about how we view ourselves. Again, living in that tension between I am dust and ashes, I mean nothing, and Bishvili nivra halam, for my sake the world was created. That paradox, that tension, that ability to choose how much we matter. I don't have an answer for where you're supposed to live, and it probably mostly depends on the day and the moment and the need at hand. But we get these 7-year cycles, and to go back to the Dubna Magid, he says, if we counted our years by Shmitot and Yovelot, which is the 7-year cycle and the 50-year cycle, rather than just seconds, minutes, and hours, what a different perspective we would have. So is your reference point the mass and energy of the universe? Is your shared reference point a mosquito? Is it a tree? Is it all the things you could be and could have been and ought be? Is it people who came before you, those who will come after you? There is no perfect answer. And it probably depends on where you sit and what's required at the moment. And understanding that you are both incredibly significant and incredibly insignificant. And that both of those things can be freeing, and both of those things can be paralyzing. I want to leave you with the Mei HaShiloach. Rabbi Mordechai Yosef Leiner, one of the middle generations of the Hasidic rabbis in Poland in the 19th century. And he's citing, I think, one of the first verses the first verse, V'shavata ha'aretz, you will settle the land, a Sabbath of God. Settling and Sabbath are almost the same root. Right? So he says the land itself should be terrifying because we know it as the land that eats people. If you behave badly, the land will just devour you. Whether that's metaphoric or literal, it's not so clear. Which I think is like Oklahoma and the Dust Bowl devouring people. The land is so penurious that it's impossible to eke out a living. He says, but if you trust in God and you settle it, you will be a settled spirit. So maybe the guidepost, the marker of whether to see ourselves as ultimately significant or ultimately insignificant and to navigate that paradox is our spirit. Do we find it at a moment settling to understand ourselves as not so big? Or do we find it at a moment settling to understand our work and our actions as truly significant? And again, I think there is no one answer. I think it's decided on a moment-by-moment, case-by-case basis.